Hello, my name is Taya Graham. This is Stephen Janis, and we're here with a Police Accountability Report breaking news update. One of the three officers involved with the raid that caused the death of Breonna Taylor in March of 2020 has been charged, not with murder, not with manslaughter, but with reckless endangerment. Why were they charged with reckless endangerment? Not for the death of Breonna Taylor, not for the shots that were fired into her apartment, but for the shots that were recklessly fired into the apartment of a neighbor, endangering three people. Here to talk about it is Stephen Janis. So first, tell me about what you heard from the Kentucky Attorney General, Daniel Cameron.
Well, Daniel Cameron said that a grand jury indicted Brett Hankinson, who is one of three officers who fired into the apartment complex where Breonna Taylor lived. None of those bullets, according to the investigation, hit Breonna Taylor, but instead went into an adjoining apartment where three people were actually living at the time. And so the charges are related to three people who were living in that apartment at the time. They are 3 counts of wanton endangerment, which is a 4th-class felony, but has nothing to do with actually the death of Breonna Taylor. It's just because he endangered lives. He allegedly was in the parking lot actually when the raid was occurring, ran up to a window where he couldn't see and fired blindly. This officer, Hankinson, has also been fired for reckless disregard for human life, and wanton endangerment is a similar charge for the reckless regard for human life, and which could lead to substantial risk of death. So that charge has nothing to do, as you point out, nothing at all to do. The charges were handed down by a grand jury that was impaneled to supposedly independently investigate this, but of course there are questions about that right now.
So tell me a little bit about what you know about grand juries. There's this saying that a prosecutor can get a ham sandwich indicted when they present it to the grand jury. Tell us how grand juries work, and are they actually independent?
Well, grand juries are extremely passive instruments. I mean, they are just people like you and I who are called in to serve in a grand jury, not legal experts, not investigators, and they are completely swayed by the information presented by the prosecutors. The prosecutors basically control what they see and hear, and the prosecutors are the ones who can propose statutes. And, the Attorney General was very evasive about what statutes he proposed, what crimes he proposed, if he proposed any against the other officers. Now, what's really interesting about that is that the FBI has a completely conflicting ballistics report from the Kentucky State Police. The Kentucky State Police said they could not determine which bullet killed Breonna Taylor of the 6 bullets that hit her, but the FBI determined that Miles Cosgrove's bullet actually killed Breonna Taylor. So the question was the grand jury presented with a homicide count or a murder count or a manslaughter count? And he would not answer that question. I think that's very revealing. We don't know. The other question he wouldn't answer about the grand jury was the racial composition of the grand jury. He said that he was not going to reveal that because grand juries are secret. But
he wanted to protect the grand jury, but I don't really see how revealing that demographic information, either about gender or race, would injure the grand jury in any way.
No, I don't think that revealing, giving their names and addresses might be one thing, but saying that it was 30% African American I think would be absolutely not disclosing anything that could harm anybody. So grand juries are not what they're cut out to be. They are always posed by prosecutors as being these independent bodies, but they are swayed by the prosecutor. The prosecutor makes a decision on what they see and what they hear and the evidence presented to them and the context of the evidence. So no, I think grand juries are kind of farcical in some ways.
Something that I think we need to add that the mainstream media hasn't been paying much attention to is the fact that this Attorney General, Daniel Cameron, is a Republican who recently spoke at the Republican National Convention on Trump's behalf. And he was also named, shortlisted, one of 20 on a list of possible Supreme Court justices to be nominated by Trump. So do you think that these partisan politics might be injected in any way, especially because he kept on saying the words mob and mob justice? I feel as if he was trying to conflate protests, which may have had some criminal behavior, some criminal elements may have involved, but continuing to talk about mobs and mob justice, I feel like he was conflating peaceful protests with criminal behavior.
Yeah, I mean, if he uses that kind of language that Trump has used about protesters, saying they're mobs or they're Antifa, or using that kind of language and that rhetoric, I think raises great doubts about his impartiality and about the way he conducted this investigation. One of the interesting things about what he said, and I think raises a lot of questions, was that he was not looking into the process for obtaining the warrant, which has been very controversial, right? Remember, the investigators obtained several no-knock warrants that night. They had already arrested the suspect, who was an old boyfriend of Breonna Taylor's. They had already found drugs and confiscated most of the evidence. But he said, interestingly, that the FBI is looking into how the warrants were obtained, because the very controversial aspect of the case is the fact that they obtained a no-knock warrant for someone who wasn't even a target of the investigation, who was home with her boyfriend boyfriend, and then, pounded on the door.
And I would like to add that the New York Times reported that 12 witnesses from the apartment complex were interviewed to ask if they heard the knock and if they heard police announce themselves. And 11 of the 12 witnesses said that they did not hear the police announce themselves after they knocked.
And what's interesting about it is Attorney General Cameron said that they presented to the jury the evidence of one witness who said that that person had heard them announce themselves, which would have been very important in terms of predicating a crime, because that one witness became determinative in terms of what the grand jury was hearing. And it's very interesting that other media organizations have combed that apartment complex and asked people and found only one person who will corroborate that. So that's a critical point about grand juries too, is the fact that the grand jury was presented with the fact that they did announce themselves, which, let's remember, Kenneth Walker, who was Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, said he or she never heard them say police. Right. Never said it. I mean, we've already played those recordings. So yeah, that raises great questions.
And just to reiterate what Stephen said, Kenneth Walker, who's Breonna Taylor's fiance, defended their home when he heard someone knock and then the door of their home was taken off its hinges. And Breonna Taylor was shot by at least 6 bullets. A.G. Cameron said that she lost her life within 2 minutes of being shot. This was a young woman who was an EMT, who wanted to become a nurse practitioner, who had a fiance, wanted to get married, and wanted to have children. And her life was taken away brutally in less than 2 minutes. So Officer Brett Hankinson has been charged with 3 counts of reckless endangerment. They are felonies. They could possibly carry a maximum of 5 years each. And we'll see whether or not he's actually brought to any kind of justice. I'm Taya Graham. This is Stephen Janis. This is Breaking News Update for the Police Accountability Report. Please be safe out there.